Evening, Lancaster. It is so good to see you. Doesn't it feel like a gift to be here tonight in person together? So the danger of going like in the last set is that you get inspired and scribble down lots of notes, and there's a million things that I'd love to talk about tonight, but I'm going to talk about cities. But first I'm going to talk about a river. So at the beginning of the pandemic, my family and I were privileged enough to buy a set of 4 kayaks, and we spent a lot of time on the river during the pandemic. Found out that it was a really, really great way to social distance as you're working with friends, and one of our friends is here that did that with us. Paddle down the river, and honestly, we spent most of that time on the Conestoga, on just about every stretch of the Conestoga from the beginning to the end in Lancaster County. And that felt like such a gift to see the wildlife, to see the diverse terrain, to see the farm fields, to see the people who were playing and recreating in the river, on the edges of the river, and to come through the city. And if you've never seen the city from the view of the river, I highly, highly recommend it. Look for the Conestoga River Club and Todd Roy if you don't know him already. He has boats he can rent to you, take you on tours, show you what that looks like. But get on the river and see what the city looks like from the river, because if you haven't seen it from the river side, I don't think you've actually seen it. So before I get going too far, I want to just give props to my friend and coworker Douglas Smith, who's a senior planner at the City of Lancaster. He was the one, really the force behind the city's climate action plan that I want to talk about with you tonight. And he couldn't be here tonight, so I'm kind of pinch hitting for him, and hope you'll bear with me on my notes. He talked a lot about how we have to know what we've lost to better understand where we need to go. When we think about what the ecology of Lancaster looks like, picture what maybe it used to be 400 years ago, 500 years ago. And I think if you ever spent time in County Park, just south of the city limits, you might have an idea of what that could be. Expansive tree canopy, streams and rivers, right through the middle of the city, different stream beds. Beautiful, if we can imagine that. And unfortunately, as humans, one of the ways that we've impacted this ecosystem, and some of those streams I want to specifically talk about, have literally become our sewers. We have turned our back on the Conestoga. We have literally treated it like a dump, like trash, like a sewer. And I think we have an incredible opportunity to think about it as a metric, as a measure, as a barometer of how well we're doing around our climate work writ large. And so I want to talk a little bit more about that. When I started working for the city 3 years ago, my onboarding, the most memorable parts of my onboarding were at the wastewater treatment plant. If you've never been there, fascinating, you know? You never think about this stuff. What happens when you flush the toilet? The water treatment plant, how we take for granted getting clean, drinkable water that comes out of our Conestoga River, out of our Susquehanna River. We learned about the stormwater work that Lancaster's been up to for so many years to try to keep more of that stormwater out of our old combined sewer system. Lancaster's like a lot of other places in the country that has old combined sewer and rainwater systems that blend together. And when it rains, that means it overflows. And so we are responsible as a community for emitting about 750 million gallons of combined sewer overflow into the Conestoga River. So think about that. We're currently, as a city, under a consent decree with the Environmental Protection Agency at the federal level to repair that. So literally, when we think about what Lancaster looks like in 20 years, we have a 20-year window to do that work, to mitigate that work. So I want to talk about what I think Lancaster could look like when we get there. There's a lot to say. I think one of the other things, thinking about stormwater systems and watersheds, is that it's not just the city, but we're just kind of a point. We're one point on this whole river. And early on, you heard the first talk with Clean Water Partners and thinking about how this is a whole ecosystem. So we are aware that we're one point on the river and part of that. So I want to share a couple statistics with you. Lancaster is 14th in the nation in terms of the biggest increases in heavy downpours. This is one of the main ways we see the impacts of climate change hitting us right here. We've had 7 of the 10 hottest days in the last 100 years, in the last 20 years. We've already seen impacts on our already poor air quality, and we have a huge propensity for urban flooding. So out of all of this, we did a climate action plan 3 years ago, and what it tells us is pretty interesting, and I think this is partly what's so exciting about what we're all doing here with RegenAll and what we have more to learn. The city government, when we measure what we're doing, the city activities account for about 3 to 4% of all of the citywide emissions. So that's kind of interesting to think about city government accounting for just 3 or 4%. And so in that plan, we've built 25 different strategies in 6 key areas to progressively reduce the amount of carbon that the city emits beyond the 2017 baseline. In those areas are energy, vehicle fleet, water, wastewater, stormwater is kind of one big utility bucket, waste, building a culture of sustainability, and carbon offsets. And as you might know, and if you're part of the City of Lancaster, you've seen this, we've done so many things over the last decade to be really proud of. We are one of the leaders in the country in terms of per capita green roofs. So there's one on this building, there's one on City Hall, there's one on the wastewater treatment plant. If you start looking around and you actually go up to the buildings next door and you can look around, you can see what that looks like from the air, which is really great. We've become a LEED Gold city, one of the first cities in the country to be that. We've done so much work to increase sidewalks, street trees, and bike lanes, contentious as they are, to keep more people riding bikes and doing alternative transportation. But beyond that, one of the most important things that we learned in looking at a climate action plan and measuring how we perform is that 84% of the city's emissions derive from our energy consumption. So you think about all those little things, changing all the lights, all the traffic signals to LED, from other systems, all the changing of the street lights to LEDs, those account for such a small, small portion of what the city emissions actually make up. And so of that 84%, 70% of the whole is just from water and wastewater, and the pumping, the processing, and all that work. So that really is where the vast majority of our impact lies, and the opportunity to do so much better. We can do things through investments in new technologies like digesters for the biosolids that are coming through that process, or on-site energy production, expansion of new work to keep more stormwater out of our combined sewers. And the good news here, if you've been following the news, is that we're also looking at some of the biggest infrastructure investments that we've seen in our lifetimes. So we're gonna see a lot of that coming to Lancaster, to cities like ours, to be able to invest, and specifically into water, stormwater, and wastewater. So there's gonna be a lot more to report on that as time goes on. And I'm already way out of time here. But what I wanna say, just for closing, is that while the city's impact represents just a small amount of our emissions, what's important is city buy-in and leadership at the municipal level. We want to do our part and also support an expansion of this work where it can have the biggest impact. And I would encourage all of you who live in other places to advocate for your places, your governments, your municipal government, your county government, and others to do anything that they can at the local level. And what I'm most excited about is this, is RegenAll, is talking about what we can do to expand this idea beyond just city, but looking at this as a whole, looking at it as the whole watershed, looking at it as the whole community and how we can have the most impact. Because 20 years from now, I hope we can all go out on that river, turn our faces to it, and really see it as the asset that it is. Thanks so much.